This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to this edition of Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from Africa and beyond. But let's start with a quick run through the markets here for you. So Safaricom, Kenya's largest telco, has formally announced that it will start 5G services sometime this year. Now, the market seemed to be rather agnostic to that news, though. Its shares was over 4% lower in today's trading session. They've been more or less flat so far in 2020, down 1.1% in about 6 weeks. Elsewhere, the all-share index at the JSE mostly flat so far in the year, about 1.2% higher in 6 weeks. You could argue that the market is looking for some direction as far as domestic politics and fiscal policy are concerned. Might we get some? We'll find out in the course of the hour. Here's what's coming up tonight. President Cyril Ramaphosa is due to address the challenges facing South Africa. A massive tech event, the Mobile World Congress, is cancelled due to the coronavirus outbreak. And we'll introduce you to an architect who's created a haven where fruits and veggies can grow all year round. All right, then, let's keep an eye on a developing story of following for you in this hour. In South Africa, all eyes were on President Cyril Ramaphosa as he was expected to deliver his much-anticipated fourth State of the Nation address until it was suspended barely 10 minutes ago. Mr. Ramaphosa's speech was being very closely watched, not just by South African citizens who are feeling hurt by the current economic malaise, but also by investors and ratings agencies too. This comes amid ongoing load shedding, relatively high unemployment, it's still stuck at 29%, and troubled state-owned enterprises like Eskom and South African Airways, and of course, poor economic growth of about 1% for the last couple of years. We'll keep an eye on that story and bring you the latest as we get it. Now, still in South Africa, the fate of new coal investments pretty much across the continent hangs in the balance as many investors are opting out of the once lucrative sector. That's partly because of environmental reasons, but also because of pressure from shareholders and investors to get out of energy projects with an enormous carbon footprint. In South Africa, the government says it plans to transition from coal to more sustainable, green, clean energy sources for its power. But for now, coal is still king, as CGTN's Angela Coppola now explains.
The South African coal mining sector produced some 258.9 million tonnes of coal in 2018, ranking it the 7th largest coal producer in the world. It employs over 90,000 people with annual earnings of over $2 billion. So any talk of a just transition to cleaner energy sources for the country has to factor this in.
The developing world has an energy security problem, and we're part of that. And coal is still and will be for some time a very important component of actually solving that. So you cannot undermine the growth potential of these economies by undermining their energy security.
The climate change imperatives are well known and accepted by most leaders in industry sectors. But one analyst suggests that the South African position has subtly changed when it comes to coal as a means to generate electricity.
Other countries around the world are already undertaking certain transitions and are making justice elements part of those transitions. What we're doing is we're using political rhetoric in order to send a signal to the economy and to the marketplaces or the market forces so that they can move in a particular direction without the necessary guidance as well as the necessary regulatory framework.
Essentially, it's about the shareholders in the financial institutions and the strength of their views on climate change.
If we decide that we're going to stay on this track, irrespective, we could face a challenge down the line in terms of where do we get funding. But there's new technology coming out all the time, so those are also things that would potentially play a role.
There's still a strong case for investment in
global trends that started. The financial services industry is being, if not pulled, being pushed that way. So I think it's something that's definitely going to happen. I think it's an important trend that has to be watched. Coal's in an interesting space because we have no real investment in terms of new projects, new supply. But we have demand continuing to grow, mostly from Asia and other emerging markets. And so you have a situation where a few years down the line we might have coal deficits in terms of supply.
The just transition from coal to renewables and cleaner energy is a long process, not something that can be rushed, and South Africa has to take advantage of those natural resources in order to grow its economy. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Mpumalanga, South Africa.
On to North Africa now. Tunisia's central bank is proposing a foreign exchange amnesty. Now, theoretically, that could provide hundreds of millions of dollars to the state. But the question is, at what cost? CGTN's Adin Chouachi takes up that story.
The central bank proposed, as part of its general guidelines on the review of exchange legislation, to work with the various structures concerned, so as to gradually lift exchange restrictions that hinder some transactions with foreign countries for institutions and individuals.
This is an important project because it will provide additional resources to the state fund. There are millions in foreign exchange circulating in the parallel market and abroad. The state, as well as thousands of Tunisians, will benefit from the amnesty.
The central bank is also planning to bring about some changes aimed at completing the liberalization of current operations to introduce more flexibility and transparency in the exchange regulations.
The review of the exchange law, which requires the amendment of Law Number 18 of 1976 and the implementing texts, is mainly linked to the Tunisian state policy in this area. The central bank aims to implement more transparency.
The Finance Committee at the Tunisian Parliament has rejected the proposal and urged the government to introduce a new bill.
The Tunisian Parliament is not willing to encourage tax evasion and to legalize the situation of people who made millions in illegal ways. The central bank wants to give incentives to some businessmen who do not deserve it. We will back any project that favors real transparency.
According to the central bank governor, the amnesty covers investments by non-resident foreigners in Tunisia, such as the publication of Circular Number 14 of 2018 on the digitization of the investment form as a bank document allowing non-resident investors to benefit from the transfer guarantee. Regarding transfers abroad made by Tunisian institutions for foreign investment, the maximum amount was set at $1 million when financing with the business account in foreign exchange for exporting companies. Tunisia's foreign currency assets reached nearly $7 billion, which corresponds to 115 days of imports. Adin Chouachi, CGTN, Tunis.
All right, and let's head back to our lead story at this particular hour. The State of the Nation address ideally should have started in the last hour in South Africa. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela is covering this address essentially in Parliament buildings in Cape Town. She joins us now live on the phone. So, Yolisa, Parliament kicked off with major disruptions, really, for the last 60 minutes from the economic freedom fighters this evening. They've essentially stopped, prevented the president from making a speech. Tell us more about what's happening.
Quite historic, Ramah. In fact, as it is where we are at the parliamentary precinct in Cape Town, you can see a whole lot of media people trying to seek some comment for the ministers who have walked out of the city. You would know that this is something that has never happened. You know that the EFF, opposition party, has done this a number of times, disruptions. What they started with today was to demand that former president, F.W. de Klerk, leave the assembly. They are accusing him of having killed thousands of South Africa. You remember that he was the last apartheid president. But also, after the dawn of democracy, the same president became a deputy to Mr. Mandela. So that went on for a while, but de Klerk ultimately was allowed to sit in. And then they went on to the issue of Pravin Gordhan. At this point, we do know that SOEs or state-owned entities in South Africa are quite crisis-ridden, and they're putting the blame squarely on Pravin Gordhan as a public enterprise minister. After a whole lot of ruction that took over about 45 minutes, the presiding officers of, or rather the Speaker of Parliament, decided to suspend sitting. Everyone now is literally outside. No one is giving us any answers as to how long the suspension will go on.
All right, we do apologise for the quality of that line there. That's Yulisa Njamela speaking to us on the line from Cape Town. The State of the Nation address was expected to happen, was scheduled to happen. In fact, at the top of the last hour, that clearly hasn't happened. The Economic Freedom Fighters Party, led by Julius Malema, have essentially disrupted proceedings at Parliament buildings in Cape Town. We'll get you a more comprehensive summary of exactly what went down in South Africa a little later. Now, let's turn our attention to the business of energy. Oil demand is set to fall this quarter. And that's important because this is the first time that this is happening since the financial crisis back in 2009. This is, of course, due to the coronavirus outbreak in China, the world's second largest economy and a significant market for crude oil. Now, according to the International Energy Agency, the IEA, demand in the first quarter of 2020 is expected to fall by 435,000 barrels a day. It does expect a bit of a rebound in the second quarter, though. Oil demand to go up by 1.2 million barrels and then normalize sometime in the third quarter with growth of about 1.5 million barrels per day on likely economic stimulus measures that may come in China. OPEC, Russia and other producers, OPEC Plus, as they're more colloquially known, have agreed to cut output by 1.7 million barrels a day until the end of March in order to support the market. Now, still on energy matters, roughly 1 billion barrels of crude oil has been discovered in northeastern Nigeria. That's according to the country's Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Temipre Silva. Now, the minister says that the discovery is expected to attract foreign investment, hopefully generate some local employment and increase government revenues as well. Let's try and get a bit more details on this particular story. Phil Ahaza joins us on the line from Nigeria's capital with more on this. So, Phil, walk us through the key numbers here. An estimated 1 billion barrels of crude oil found, but how much of that can be commercially extracted? And how much natural gas was also found in the area?
Well, thank you, Rama. According to the minister, the figures are not totally out yet from the jury. But from the evaluation results, we can see he says that a lot of oil is yet to be found in the country. But this is not the first time we've heard this development. Preliminary results show that the NNPC discovered this this amount of oil around the Gongola Basin. That's around Bauchi and Gombe states. So it indicates that the discovery consists of gas, condensate, and light sweet oil of API gravity ranging from 38 to 41. Of course, we know that the best kinds of oil ranges from 40 to 45 API gravity. That's the American Petroleum Institute gravity. So this also confirms that the oil is of commercial value. We also know that the NNPC is planning to drill additional wells for full evaluation of the volume of hydrocarbon that has been discovered in this region. So until that is found, we'll get more details of the numbers there.
Indeed. So most of Nigeria's oil industry, though, is located around the coastal areas, right, around Port Harcourt and so on and so forth. So assuming this is commercially viable, will NNPC have to build a pipeline network to get the oil down to the south end of the country, or will it instead focus on developing local processing infrastructure instead?
Well, Rama, it's going to be a very tall order because building such a humongous infrastructure like a refinery is expected to take a lot of time and resources. You'd recall that the federal government has placed 2023 as the target to overhaul all refinery facilities and upgrade it for it to operate optimally. That's the 3 refineries, 2 in the south and 1 in the north. But as far as there's a refinery in the north, that's in Kaduna State, we don't see in the short term the government investing in such a huge infrastructure. We know that, of course, once all is done, all is settled, the crude and gas in raw forms can come from that area to the Kaduna refinery where it can be processed. We also know that, like you said, of course, modular refineries will have to operate in that region, but that's only if several factors like the petroleum industry bill is passed, insecurity is tackled in that region. But for now, we know that this discovery is definitely going to open up opportunities for new oil and gas infrastructure in that region.
Indeed. One last question for you, Phil. So the oil price assumption for the 2020 budget was about $57 a barrel. But looking at the markets in the last 2 or 3 weeks, Brent crude has been below that level for most of February. Would Nigeria be in a position to back up a production cut in order to prop up prices?
Well, the country has been maintaining full compliance so far with its, cuts in production. The NNPC boss, Mele Kyari, actually stated that in December the country achieved its quota of 1.77 million barrels per day for crude, and that means that the country definitely wants to maintain that compliance as long as the OPEC member countries and its allies agree. So we're seeing that, of course, world over, there's a major challenge where the world's biggest importer of crude oil, that's China, which consumes about 14 million barrels per day, has had to cut that down severely to about 20% per day. So that affected the pricing generally because, of course, the Asian country is tackling one of the deadliest diseases in the world, that's coronavirus. But there are expectations that if this is tackled, the prices will go up. But for now, experts say this is definitely it actually has the capability of leading Nigeria's economy into another recession and shortage of foreign exchange, given that the nation's foreign reserve has depleted to about $40 billion. So the hope is that, of course, the Joint Technical Committee of OPEC and non-OPEC panel, they're supposed to have a meeting tomorrow and agree on further cuts, probably another 500,000 barrels for January to March, in addition to the 1.2 million previously agreed upon. That's a huge one, but it, of course, is to maintain the pricing. So we hope that whatever comes out of the meeting, and if Nigeria agrees to the production cuts, it won't affect the economy in the long term.
Right, we'll have to see how this plays out. Philly Hazza on the line there from Abuja. Thank you. Time now for a run through some company headlines. And we start at the intersection of Nigeria and fossil fuels. A startup airline in the country, Green Africa Airways, is reportedly close to signing a deal with Airbus. Now, this is according to reports by the Wall Street Journal. The airline announced a commitment for up to 100 aircraft, A320s, I believe, evenly split into 50 firm orders and an option for 50 more. Total deal carries a list price of about $11.7 billion. It's the largest such aircraft buying agreement from Africa. Elsewhere, Nissan Motor Company has reported a loss of $237 million for the fourth quarter of 2019. Quarterly sales slipped by nearly 18% to $23 billion as vehicle sales fell in Japan, the United States, Europe and China. Chief Executive Makoto Uchida says a turnaround plan is in place and details are going to be released later on in May. Still in the car business, Tesla is recalling more than 15,000 vehicles because of a power steering issue, apparently, that could increase the risk of a crash. Now, the recall affects the Model X SUV, the one with the fancy Falcon doors, in North America. Areas in very cold climates that use road salt, apparently, are thought to be most at risk, but Tesla says drivers can continue to use their vehicles before this matter gets addressed. And finally, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, otherwise known as AIIB, is ready to offer support to the Chinese government in its fight against the coronavirus, now formerly known as COVID-19. The bank's president is ready to support China through public health infrastructure loans to meet the government's immediate and longer-term public health needs. That's a run through your headlines. You're watching Global Business Africa. Plenty more content coming up, including this. We'll explore Somalia's plans to clear its long-awaited backlog of debt. And Nigerians are bracing for possible increase in electricity tariffs. We'll explore that when we come back.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Nairobi. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back to the program. Now, in the next month or so, Somalia hopes to have its decades-long backlog of debt arrears cleared by international lenders. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilo now explores the country's efforts to get some long-awaited debt relief.
Somalia has expressed confidence that international creditors will forgive up to $5 billion in debt in the coming months. International Monetary Fund (IMF) says that increased commitment in policy and reforms has brought Somalia closer to qualification for debt relief under the heavily indebted poor countries. Several nations, including Norway, have agreed to assist Somalia by agreeing to pay millions of dollars to the International Monetary Fund in a move aimed at reaching a debt relief for the impoverished Horn of African nation. Hussein Abdikarim is an economic advisor to the Somali president. He says his country has shown a strong performance in hitting key benchmarks in a program to work towards debt forgiveness.
Decision point is very closer now. For example, we got support from government of Norway that based what we owe from the World Bank, close to $350 million. IMF asked members to contribute as well as the developing countries, both, to get wipe out or support, give a cash Somalis need in order to get the clearance from what we owe from IMF, which is also close to more than $300 million.
One of the benchmarks set by international creditors is increased revenue mobilization. To achieve this, the country's Ministry of Finance says that it has enforced tax collection at all entry points. The country says it has modernized its customs and tax collection department in a move aimed at tackling graft.
The government started a plan to revenue mobilization to increase revenue we get from our ports and also our airports. And also, not only that, make sure that what we collected is that we expend responsibly and transparently. Make sure that everybody see what we did. So the plan we started up for 4 years, and we achieved almost last year to double our revenue that we have in 2016.
It is expected that the international community will endorse the debt relief to Somalia before May. Experts say the move will allow Somalia to seek funds critical to advancing its economy. The country's top leadership have in recent months been attending a series of conferences both at home and abroad with a view of convincing the world that Somalia is ready to rejoin the community of nations. Renovating critical infrastructure linking major towns and cities as well as youth employment projects are expected to be among the key areas of focus for the government in the coming months as the country expects to get financial aid from international creditors for the first time in decades. Abdul Aziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Now, the African Development Bank says the continent's economies do not have to depend on aid in order to survive. The president of the bank, Dr. Kenumi Adesina, says that there are numerous alternative funding sources to meet the needs of the continent. Now, his comments come after the American administration at the moment proposed some fairly dramatic cuts to foreign aid in its latest budget. CGTN's Colette Onjohi reports from the Ethiopian capital of Addis Ababa.
According to USAID, 47 African countries receive aid from the United States. In 2018 alone, it totaled $8.5 billion. The money goes towards agricultural, health, education, and good governance projects. But that assistance is now in doubt after US President Trump proposed a 21% reduction in US foreign aid. Africa will be affected. But the African Development Bank president, Akinwumi Adesina, says there are alternatives.
The second biggest source of financing for Africa's development today is actually Africa's own people. It's actually the diaspora, right? If you look at how much money people are sending to the continent, it's tremendous, okay? So how we use that, how we securitize that for investing in power, in infrastructure, in roads and so on, that's the way. I don't believe in begging.
He says more than $40 billion is sent back to the continent annually, money which can be plowed to investment. Akinwumi says national pension and sovereign funds could also help plug the gap.
Sovereign wealth of Africa should be for the sovereign, not for other people's sovereigns. And when you have pension funds in Africa investing outside, and they may say they want to make more money. Okay, you make more money. But don't forget, you're still going to pay annuity payments for people for the rest of their life. But if they have to get retirement benefits and live in places without water, without electricity, without health, that's a miserable retirement.
It is the fourth year in a row that the Trump administration is proposing foreign cuts. The 3 previous attempts have not succeeded. African countries like Kenya, Uganda, Zambia, Nigeria, and Tanzania could be most vulnerable. When that money is lost, it could have devastating impacts. Last year, when the U.S. cut aid to the Kenya's health system, it led to a shortage of blood supplies at the country's hospitals. The UN Economic Commission for Africa says as aid dwindles, the continent must reassess its domestic resource mobilization capacity.
And that is why the CFTA is important, because if we can trade, we say that we stand to gain almost $50 billion more of trading off of the CFTA. That is also resources that will then be rediverted because those businesses will pay taxes, they will create jobs that will pay taxes, and so we get more revenue. So I don't think that we should be scared of dwindling donor resources.
The U.S. proposal for foreign donor cutting is yet to be approved by Congress. Colette Onjohi, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Now, Nigeria, as you're probably aware, is the largest economy in Africa. It's also the continent's biggest oil exporter. But despite all of those advantages, it still cannot provide reliable, consistent, affordable electricity to most of its population of nearly 200 million, even though it has abundant natural gas reserves. Earlier this week, for example, over 3 gigawatts of generation capacity was offline purely because gas supplies were not available. Now, though, Nigeria's main electricity provider says power prices have to go up if the country is to have a much more stable supply. CGTN's Ifyok Etang now explains.
Ismail Adepoju is trying to get his generator to start. After a few tries, he can now begin his work for the day. Adepoju has been a printer for the past 12 years. He says Nigeria's irregular power supply has cost him some of his best clients.
Power is very important to us. If there is light, we gain profit very well. But if there is no light, we use half of the profit and buy fuel to run generator to do the work. We need light 24 hours, but we have those 4 hours light a day. But without light, we can't work.
According to U.S. aid, Nigeria has the capacity to generate 12,522 megawatts of electricity a day. That's not enough for a country with more than 180 million people. In 2013, the Nigerian power sector was privatized to promote efficiency, increase power sector funding, and generate sufficient power. But one distribution company says it faces a number of challenges.
As a distribution company in the downstream sector of the power sector, in the downstream line of the power sector, we have been bedeviled in recent times with the issues of vandalism, the issues of energy theft, the issues of non-payment of bills. And the chief of them all is the non-payment of bills, because it is this fragmented payments, this little money we collect from our customers, these little remittances they make, that sum up to the amount that we use to finance the power sector value chain at large.
The Nigerian federal government has been subsidizing energy providers in Nigeria's electricity market so that customers aren't charged at higher rates. The privatization of the power sector was originally designed to make the industry self-sustainable, but the Nigerian federal government says it has paid more than $3.5 billion to bridge the deficit since 2015. The Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, NERC, has said in April, customers will begin to pay an average of 30% more for their electricity to take the financial burden off the federal government. But economic analysts say this will pose its own challenges.
If you increase the tariffs, there's going to be inflation because they have to factor in cost of production. It's going to make people, especially SMEs, hike their own. Everybody in business is out there to make money.
Adepoju hopes to get more profits out of his business by investing in more printing machines and employing more staff. But with the impending tariff hike, he does not see that happening soon. Ifyok Etang, CGTN, Jos, Nigeria.
It's 18:32 GMT, time for a short break. Here's what's coming up shortly. Mobile World Congress has been cancelled due to the coronavirus outbreak. And the e-commerce giant Alibaba has posted a revenue gain of nearly 40% in the final quarter of 2019.
No one again, he can hold in guns. Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time?
Not at all.
What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
For a look at some economic data out of the country, the country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Perina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
we bring you news that's changing perspectives.
I'm Ucheo Paul reporting from Nairobi City Center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what do you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Now, the biggest tech event in Europe has been cancelled this year due to the coronavirus outbreak in China, a country where a significant amount of electronic components and devices are manufactured and assembled. So Mobile World Congress is the event in question. It normally takes place every February, usually at the end of it, in Barcelona in Spain. It brings together over 100,000 people to showcase all aspects of mobile tech. But the spread of coronavirus, or COVID-19 as it's now been formally named, has caused many companies, including the likes of Sony and Amazon, to pull out of the show. Now, assurances from local and national health officials in Spain that the event would be safe did little, it seems, to also win the confidence of the exhibitors. Earlier on, Barcelona's mayor had appealed for calm, insisting that the city was ready to host the event.
There is a very strong local impact for Barcelona, the whole of Catalonia and Spain. There is an economic impact from an event like this one. Of course, it worries us, and in the next few days, we will evaluate the situation for all the most affected sectors. We will face this together. We're going to stand together to listen to all the sectors affected and assess all the possible impacts, as well as minimize them as much as possible.
Let's now take a look at how online retailers in the world's second largest economy are essentially renting staff to fill personnel shortages due to this outbreak.
This supermarket chain operates both online and offline. Ahead of the holiday, they thought they had enough manpower to maintain operation. Then came the coronavirus.
Our orders have been increasing since the holiday started. In a matter of 10 days, it's being pushed to a high level, about twice of our usual sales.
The outbreak has forced many catering businesses to shut down, as customers and staff either stay at home or are put in isolation. The supply burden was offloaded from offline to online platforms. Some sectors decided to rent hands from those in temporary shutdown.
4 young men came to us on February 3rd. We provided them with training before they started to work. All of them have been staying here in Shenzhen. They didn't leave the city during the holiday, and they have never had fever or showed symptoms such as coughing in the past 2 weeks.
These temporary workers are mainly assigned basic tasks, such as packaging, sorting, and the shelves. Workers were chosen from catering services because restaurant experience is helpful.
Their training with the catering services is relevant to our work, and they already have health certificates. This spares us the procedures for a normal hire.
These workers can go back to their original jobs when their employers reopen. In the meantime, both they and their temporary boss are more than satisfied.
It feels good to have work to do.
Our company will cover the payment. Their payment standards is negotiated based on the payment standards for our own staff.
The general uncertainty has more businesses coming on board to keep the supply chain going. And many are watching to see whether the stopgap model turns into a trend after the emergency is over. Chuck Tinte, CGTN.
In the meantime, China's Alibaba Group had a rather great quarter to close out 2019 with strong gains in revenues and earnings that topped analysts' forecasts. The e-commerce giant managed to post a revenue gain of about 38% in the 3 months that ended on the 31st of December. Earnings are up by almost 50% from the same period last year. The profit surge was mainly due to strong performances in online retail and its cloud computing divisions. Alibaba, however, sounded a note of caution about the start of 2020 because of the coronavirus outbreak. The company says this epidemic is a concern and it's doing all it can to help Chinese consumers to cope. Last October, the United States imposed a 25% tariff on a whole range of products from Europe, and that included wine. Sales of French wine into the United States have fallen by quite a bit since then. Here's CGTN's Jessica King reporting from Finexpo in the French capital.
From deep red to pale rosé, the French are famous for their wine and champagne. 2,000 winemakers are showcasing their drinks here at the Vinexpo in Paris, hoping to secure new deals.
This is the moment where all the buyers from all over the world are joining the show in order to be the first to try the new wines made by the different winemakers from France, but not only France, as we have 20 countries representing a total of up to 60 wine territories.
From Burgundy to Bordeaux, France is one of the biggest wine producers in the world, but it's facing a number of challenges. Sales to America have slumped since October after the US imposed 25% tariffs on a range of European delicacies. A tit-for-tat transatlantic trade war has left French winemakers suffering.
As you know, America is the biggest export market for all the French wine. It accounts for 20% of all the export of French wine. It's a major market. We reckon we down in the last 2 months 30% volume value down in terms of shipment to the US.
From trade wars to changing consumer habits and the impact of global warming, the industry is having to adapt. Among the innovations here is this futuristic-looking electric tractor used by the French champagne makers Moet. They say that when this model is used in the vineyards, it can reduce the carbon footprint by 23 tons a year compared with a regular tractor. International trade events like this present a valuable opportunity to sell, but also to network.
For us, it's really important not just looking for new customers, that we are always aiming to have more, but it's also to keep relations with our partners. They come from all over the country, so here is a meeting point.
Despite the market uncertainty in France, there is optimism that shining a light on the industry's latest products, as well as advances in sustainability and tech, will attract more and more countries to one of France's key exports. Jessica King, CGTN, Paris.
Now, there's been a shift in demand from China to Southeast Asia in the international business aviation market. As the ASEAN economies do continue to develop, there's an increasing number of business people who are looking for efficient and, in quite a few cases, luxurious travel. CGTN's Mira Liu is at the Singapore Air Show to find out what's hot in the aviation sector.
As business jet fleet growth stalls in China, the market in Southeast Asia is taking off, with Market Watch predicting that the region could supersede North America as well as Europe in the next 2 decades. Dassault Aviation is at the Singapore Air Show to showcase its ultra-long-range Falcon 8X, which can fly non-stop from Beijing to New York, and a mock-up of its ultra-wide-body Falcon 6X, with the largest cabin cross-section of any purpose-built business jet.
What is fueling the demand is that those corporations that used to fly on smaller aircraft now realize they need also big aircraft to get to more destinations with more people on board, with more range and more comfort. The key countries are Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore, and we see other countries buying aircraft now, like Vietnam and of course the Philippines. There are these companies getting very big and getting global, having a urgent need for flying far.
Aviation experts also note that Chinese business leaders are increasingly using long-range business jets to access factories in the ASEAN region as manufacturing shifts from China, in part due to the US-China trade war.
Usually it's companies that are locally based. It happens sometimes that there are some companies with Chinese origin.
In the developing region of Southeast Asia, where manufacturing is growing across the countries, not just in city hubs, business leaders need to be able to access more remote locations lacking in infrastructure. The Honda Jet Elite is a small, very light jet, which can fit 7 passengers with a range of up to 2,661 kilometers and a focus on inter-regional business travel.
We've brought the Honda Jet to this region specifically because of the interest we have in Southeast Asia for the aircraft. It's the perfect fit for the region for intercity pairs. If you look at the amount of high net worth individuals within the Southeast region, and then the number of private jets, it's a high number of individuals with a low number of aircraft. The one thing that this type of jet brings you is the ability to go into more regional type airports, which allows you to do business quicker, faster, and that's the key. This is a business tool. It buys you time, and it buys you efficiency.
A new generation of Southeast Asian business leaders are propelling their companies and economies forwards. As the ASEAN region continues on its upward growth trajectory, it seems that the sky's the limit for business jet sales in Southeast Asia. Miro Lu, CGTN, Singapore.
All right, then a quick run through commodity prices here for you. So we don't often talk about gold, at least not the production side of it in this part of the program, but something rather interesting has happened on the output side. South Africa's gold output rose by nearly a quarter on a year-on-year basis in December, according to data from Stats SA. This is the biggest increase of its kind that we've seen since January 2016, but that's not really the entire picture. South Africa used to be the biggest gold producer on the continent. Ghana took that spot sometime last year. Nonetheless, spot gold prices up by over 20% in the last 12 months. We're back in 60 with more content on global business.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys. The greatest sights. The greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. Now, climate change is a pretty complicated problem and there's no silver bullet solution for it. But certain specific environmental issues can be solved by the right code. Here's CGTN's Laura Olubengo now exploring how one architect in Mali is paving the way for local greenhouse production in a country that's very vulnerable to rapidly rising temperatures and dwindling water supplies.
The growth of vegetables in Mali today is much more intense than it was 40 years ago, when Amadou Sidibe was visiting his father's farm outside the capital, Bamako.
In the time of our grandfathers, it used to rain and the cycle was regular, but now the rains are a lot more irregular and drought has become a lot more frequent, making it hard to grow crops.
In Mali, climate change is threatening around 80% of the population that derive their income from agriculture. The sector itself accounts for 35% of the country's GDP. Rising temperatures, erratic rainfall and creeping desertification are just some of the reasons Sidibe built this first fully automated greenhouse in 2011. As an architect, Sidibe traveled extensively. He got the idea of building a greenhouse after visiting Israel, where he says the climate is similar to that of Mali. Sidibe believes water control is the key to conquering climate change.
This little computer is a technological jewel that controls the irrigation for the whole farm. It controls the quantity of water for each plant. This farm has more than 40,000 plants, so this computer provides the same amount of water and the same amount of fertilizer, and this automation enables the retrieval once the plants have been watered in accordance with what it needs. A certain amount remains, normally that's around 40%. We stock it for the next day's irrigation.
Sidibe Agrotechnics also trains future farmers in agricultural innovation. It does this by sharing expertise with its workforce, who have seen a net increase in the production and quality of their crops at home.
Yes, I want to do the same thing for myself. If I had the means, I will not hesitate to get involved in greenhouse agriculture. It's fantastic, and you never lose any crops.
At first, Sidibe was frustrated by the government's lack of interest in his greenhouse project, which began with a 300 square meter plot of land. But thanks to a loan from the World Bank in 2013, Sidibe has expanded his project to half a hectare. And in 2016, that turned into 1 hectare. His farm produces 200 tons of tomatoes a year, 60 tons of melons and 40 tons of cucumbers. He also grows lemons and coriander. Sidibe believes that if nothing is done against climate change, Africa won't be able to feed her children. He's determined to prove that modern technology and AI agriculture is the key to overcoming the threat of climate change and food security. Laura Olubengo, CGTN.
On to South Africa now, where the Wits University Art Exhibition is celebrating the legacy of the legendary artist David Koloane following his passing in 2019. As an artist and a social activist, Koloane's art provided insight into the daily experiences and struggles of Johannesburg's black residents. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela takes up that story.
David Koloane was a mentor for many of South Africa's contemporary artists. The legendary artist worked to create spaces such as the Bag Factory Artist Studios and Tupelo workshops for young black artists to flourish.
He would always make time for artists who just walked in off the street carrying their portfolio bags, and these are kind of artists that have no formal training, don't know anything about making conceptual work or anything like that, but just have a technical ability. And he always made time to speak to them and to guide them in some kind of way and encourage them to think about what they wanted to do and how they wanted to engage with art.
In his drawings, paintings and collages, Koloane explored questions about political injustice and human rights. He's considered to have been an influential artist and writer during the apartheid years here in South Africa.
Koloane's work has been widely exhibited locally and internationally, so the Wits Arts Museum is just the latest in hosting this much celebrated artist's work.
The exhibition, which is the retrospective exhibition of David Koloane's work, for me, is very personal, having known him. As I said in the discussion earlier, there is a real sense of love in it, which I feel because I had been in that space. But there's also a joy and a sadness in having seen some of those works being created in his studio. His impact has been tremendous. From not just being an artist or writer or curator, but someone who founded an institution that paved the way for so many artists and curators and writers and just art administrators.
Kolwane encouraged the consumer of his work to acknowledge the lived black experience through cityscapes and everyday scenes in the township and the city. Kolwane is a revered artist, a great influence especially to black artists. In 1977, the artist opened the first ever art space in Johannesburg, dedicated specifically to black artists.
His significance is great because this man with a longer collective created spaces for me as a black female that wouldn't have existed, 30 years ago. And that's one of his life works, where he really worked hard to create spaces like the Back Factory, Tupelo Workshop. There's also Fuba.
Kolwane passed away at the age of 81 in 2019. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
All right, then a quick run through the currencies. I'm going to make this relatively quick. On a year-to-date basis, the Rand had fallen by about 6% or so ahead of today's State of the Nation address, where the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa is delivering at the moment after some pretty crazy disruptions in the last hour or so. But keep in mind, in that interval, in the last 20 minutes, it's actually extended that fall by another 0.6%. Also, we're going to be watching for tomorrow is the effect the speech has on the currency later on in trading tomorrow at the end of the week. That's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the screen. There's several ways to get your feedback back to us on the content you've seen here in the last hour. All of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.